before we really begin, I want to mention that I have actually LARPed Vampire the Masquerade before. This is, for those of you who know what that means and how that works, this was in the old World of Darkness. Um, I shouldn't just say Vampire the Masquerade. I've done some things with changelings and with mages as well. And I know technically those are separate systems. Same overall setting and concept, obviously. But I wanted to get that out there. While I have done a little bit of that, not a huge amount. It's the kind of thing that fascinated me on the concept of it. I mean this sincerely. It was the kind of thing that was entirely centered around politics, which I'll talk about more later. So it's the kind of thing that just sang to me. It's the kind of thing that I don't want to say I would be good at, because that's egotistical, but it was something that I could do. You know, there's a difference between saying, I'm amazing at this, and I feel comfortable with this. I've started to distinguish these two things in my mind lately, because I've noticed there's some things that I'm just so much more comfortable with that that just fit better with me. I may not be great at them. Like, let me give you an example. Super Metroid. Now, I am nowhere near as good as the best speedrunners of Super Metroid are. I am literally about 50 minutes behind them in their times. But I'm comfortable with Super Metroid. I can sit down right now with my controller and get right into it. Because I know that game, and it flows well with me. It fits with my brain and the way I work and the way I play. Make sense? So I'm not saying I'm amazing at Super Metroid, or at the kind of political machinations that happen in the particular style of LARPing that I've seen Vampire the Masquerade and other things take place of. It's just that it's the kind of thing that just gels perfectly with me. But, and I want to stress, I mean absolutely no offense to anybody who likes this, but the groups I happen to be interacting with, which was in the Kansas area, I'll go and tell you that, west, or I guess central Kansas area, whatever, were bad. I'm just going to say that as bluntly as I can. The people involved pushed me away. Some of the people there were a little bit too interested in other aspects of the game that I was not. It's the kind of game I would probably love to play with like-minded individuals, similar to the wartime historian role-playing style thing, where each played a nation, you know, that kind of thing. But I have followed the series idly. This is funny because I feel like I just talked about Ratchet and Clank, which is another series that I don't know much about, but I'm not completely ignorant of. I'm not walking into this like, oh, what the heck is Vampire the Masquerade? You know, I do know what this is. Now I'm going to try really hard to remember to call this particular game Bloodlines. I have a flaw where I tend to refer to this PC game, which I've played before, by the way, as Vampire the Masquerade, as opposed to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. So I'm gonna try to curb that habit during this rumination and refer to it as Bloodlines, so you know what I'm talking about. But if you hear me say Vampire the Masquerade, I'm probably referring to the game, the PC game. This game was actually made this is basically, if you have not played this game, first of all, let me say I recommend it. It's a little on the buggy side. You probably want the unofficial patch. I played with the unofficial patch. If you've ever played Alpha Protocol, you understand the concept of this game. It is a very well crafted, very well engineered in terms of branching storylines and choices and options and things you can do game, with a lot of bugs and a lot of kind of issues along the way that are indicative of those kind of things. It's no surprise, though, because most of the developers who worked on this game come from the people who also worked on games like Fallout and Arcanum of Steamworks and Magica Obscura, I believe is the full title there. Another good game, by the way. So, it's also great, though. There's two things that really help elevate this game. First, they really did their homework. While there are some obvious things that were adjusted to fit the BC game format, most notably the leveling system, this is pretty contiguous with the overall lore, concept, canon, clans, etc. of Vampire the Masquerade, the setting, you know, the World of Darkness setting. There are some obvious things that have been interpreted, most notably the Sabbat, were basically universally turned into stormtroopers, with the exception of the one guy, Andre. And Toreador was kind of turned into a good guy clan. I know that's not literal, but they're probably the most leaning towards light gray of the morass of gray and black that exists in this setting. But the other interesting thing about this game is it's basically canon. As in, the events that the major events in this game did actually have some impact on the World of Darkness setting, and were referenced stuff from the final books, and were referenced in some of the final books, which is really cool in my opinion. And also makes sense given the timing. This game came out in 2004. For those of you not aware, that's when the World of Darkness ended. Gehenna happened. You know, there's actually references to that in the game, and how the world is just completely going to hell. You know, the giant beast washing up on the shore, that kind of a thing. And so, yeah, the old World of Darkness basically ended, and all the players across the metagame were basically given the option to retire their characters, and they started the new World of Darkness. I believe the official term is Classical World of Darkness now for that old stuff, because they've started releasing some new stuff for the old stuff. And I haven't really paid that much attention to that, to be completely honest. But I mention that because, again, that happened in 2004. The Final Nights happened in 2004. And this game came out in 2004. You see the parallel here. So, while they did do their research, and they did work with the developers, and they did work with White Wolf, and blah, 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 they were also allowed a little bit more freedom than they probably would have, because the world was ending. And at the time, at least from what I understand, it was fully intended for the world to continue to just end. You know, not to do the new Coke, old Coke thing that they've got going on right now. This is most noticeable within the cab driver, but I don't want to get into that just yet. Before I go any further, this is going to be a different rumination from my usual style. Forgive me for not recalling who requested this. I really hope you're not going to be disappointed by this rumination, because I'm not doing this in my normal style. And the reason why is this is the Suikoden 2 of Western RPGs. Let me explain what I mean. Suikoden 2, as I discussed when we went through it, was a day in the life of the main character, right? I mean, really, I made that point very clear. It wasn't about some big overall plot. You were not trying to fight the Cloud of Darkness. Zemus was not... I need to stop using FF examples. Thanatos was not trying to kill the Monotree. Death Evan was not trying to rid the world of all life and kill off all the dragons, you know. There was no real major solitary plot to Suikoden 2. There were elements of plots, plural, but overall the game was just, this is the main character's story, and his maneuvering through several plots, because that makes sense, doesn't it? It's like if you did a game that was James Raynor the game, to use a weird parallel in StarCraft. Obviously there are several main plots that could be extrapolated from James Raynor's life, from everything that happened before when he was in the Confederacy, from everything that happened up to the Marsaros incident, from everything that happened with Arcturus and his group, from everything that happened in the Brood War, and from everything that happened in both Wings of Liberty and everything after that. Each of those could arguably be called a separate main plot, and that's what I mean. Imagine if one game covered James Raynor, rather than, you know, James Raynor being a major character of a given game. Does this make sense? I hope so, because I hope you guys... I'm using StarCraft as an example because it's relatively well known, so I hope you guys know what I'm talking about. I did a lore run of it. If you have not seen it. It's available on my old original YouTube channel, the one that this video is going live on, and not the new channel, which is where future lore runs will go to. But I mentioned that because that's exactly what this is. This game is the Western RPG equivalent of that. While there is a main plot about the sarcophagus and the Mizarok, or how the heck he was pronounced, that is so, like, low tier. It's practically... It's hard to explain. It's not unimportant so much as it is the backdrop by which everything else is presented. Similar to how the Darkspawn were used over in Dragon Age Origins, where the Darkspawn provided a cohesive backdrop for everything else that was going on, and thus everything else could be weighed against the Darkspawn to give them contrast. It's the same thing here. This sarcophagus situation helps to give significance and relevance to all the other things that are going on, but the overall focus is on all the other things that are going on. Make sense? This is a day in the life, is what I'm trying to say. Now, on the one hand, so my point is, the gameplay itself is somewhat different, and it's also extensive. There's a lot of things that happen, and there are dozens upon dozens of characters with speaking lines. My normal approach, which is to take notes of concepts that are interesting to me, areas, aspects of the setting, and of course characters, would involve just a gargantuan... I was picturing this, that was my original intent, but as I started going through the game and remembering, I realized that's just going to result in this absolutely huge list of characters and areas and whatnot, with like a sentence of scribbled notes to remind myself of things about it from when I did it. And I don't think that's really doing it justice. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to basically move the camera back a bit, not literally, of course, and try to focus on the overall perspective rather than saying this individual character, this individual story. There's a lot of individual stuff, and it's good stuff, but that's more the purview of a lore run than it is a rumination. So let's discuss, with that in mind, I'll go ahead and say the thing that I'm probably, some of you are probably wondering. No, I did not make a Malkavian for this playthrough. Yes, I have played a Malkavian in this game. Yes, I did it on my second playthrough of this game. This is actually my third playthrough of this game total right now. And so I am aware of several of the more than interesting dialogues that the Malkavian has, and the nature of how the PC is not even fully aware of what they're saying, right up until the big reveal point, but we'll get to that much later. I'm not going to tell you which clan I picked. You can feel free to guess. I bet you guys will be able to pick it, though. I was very torn between two. I'll go ahead and tell you that. Let's talk about the setting really quick. This is Vampire the Masquerade. The Masquerade forms so much of a backbone for the setting. So this is a setting in which things like vampires and ghouls, well, ghouls aren't kind of not what you're thinking, so let's just leave that aside. Vampires and werewolves and mages and changelings exist. Changelings being remnants of the Fae and all that fun stuff. So all of that mystical element exists in the world and has for forever. The original vampire is Cain, as is true in several different mythos of vampires. The Cain from the Bible. So vampires have been around freaking forever, is what I'm trying to say, as have the other mystical elements of the setting. And yet humanity has kind of grown up around that. I'm probably going to piss some people off here, and I don't intend to, but I compare this setting most, in overall structure, to Harry Potter. Don't kill me. Don't kill me, okay? Give me a moment. Don't diablerize me. Give me a moment to explain, okay? The Masquerades... The vampires... We'll focus on the vampires. The vampires are obviously superhuman. They have superpowers, increased strength and longevity, technically immortal life. They can be killed, obviously. They can suffer final death, and there are things that they're more weak to. There's a term in setting to referring to certain people who can tan, who can interact with the sun. But overall, they are superior to humans. But I put that in quote-unquotes for the exact same reason I would put it in quote-unquotes in the Harry Potter universe, that wizards are superior to muggles. Because that's what everyone else is in this setting, muggles. The most often term I've actually heard referred to them as mundanes. But I'm going to go and use the term muggles because it's a very commonly used term. A muggle's power over a wizard or a vampire is almost nothing. I mean, they're a joke compared to you, right? There's no way they could ever match up, right? But life isn't like that. Life is not just two cards, which you place down, which have different stats, and then evenly match up, and we see which one has the better stats to win. That's not how life works. So they've got this thing in place to make sure that the muggles don't actually know the game they're playing. They don't even know there is a game that is being played. They don't know about the wizards. They don't know about the vampires. That's the Masquerade, okay? And this is a really important part. J.K. Rowling hit this point very well, and it was something she was very adamant on in her story. And the setting, Vampire the Masquerade, makes this point very clearly too. While there are obviously benefits to having the Masquerade up, and the vampires having their own little mini-society and all that fun stuff, which I'll talk about in a moment, the flat reality is a prepared vampire is completely, an unprepared human, an unprepared muggle, is no match for a prepared vampire. An unprepared human is also no match for an unprepared vampire. But what about a prepared human? What about prepared humans? We as human beings, our greatest asset, at least I would argue, is our ability to dynamically think. Most people say we are tool users, but tool using itself is just a byproduct of that dynamic thinking. We can be cunning, we can be intelligent, we can be patient, we can be strategic. We can think a way around a situation. How many of you out there, especially those of you who've played vampire-type games or have actually played Vampire the Masquerade, either the LARP or any of the video games involved, could think right now, right off the top of your head, just bam, several ways to kill a vampire. If you were suddenly confronted by one in real life, just, okay, I can do this or this or this or this or this. I bet several of you have an answer to that. Lord knows I do. Right? Now, of course, we have to bring in the World War Z thing. So forgive me for the segue. I like to use World War Z as an argument for this because it's one of my favorite examples of this concept. We in real life have fiction. Now, I know that sounds like a weird thing, but the truth is, the whole breadth and depth of the fiction we have here in real life is enormous. So we are prepared for concepts like flying spaghetti monsters, aliens, zombies, vampires, dragons, All of these things are things that we have at least the concept of in our brain. So if we suddenly saw a dragon, it would be like, oh my god, it's an actual dragon. Well, okay, first reaction would be, oh, that's a nice special effect. But let's say for a moment we believed it really was like a real dragon actually showed up. We'd be like, oh my god. But it wouldn't be that mind-blowing, would it? Because we know what dragons are. We have fiction as a barrier between us and the fantastical, assuming it were ever to actually happen. In most fictional settings where the fantastical exists, that barrier doesn't exist. World War Z is the best example of that, because the very concept of zombies is so old hat and so commonplace that when I introduced them into Primus most recently, it's actually complicated. They're not really zombies, but whatever. I had to dance around using the term undead or zombies, even though the players immediately picked up on that's what they were, just by the way they were acting, because it's so common to us in real life, right? We have that barrier to prevent us from the concept of blowing our minds, okay? But in setting, how do you deal with a vampire if you don't know what a vampire is? Do you see the problem here? If we saw a vampire in real life, we have ways of dealing with that. We have concepts of coping with it, of coping with the knowledge, of coping with the threat of it. Humans could organize against a real vampire threat in real life very quickly and efficiently if we knew they were real. I'm not saying vampires are real, but you get my point. Thus, we see in fiction, if one of these people sees a vampire, now there's some gray area here, but in World of Darkness, about half the people you encounter who are muggles don't even know what a vampire is. They have no concept of what a vampire is. Thus, they are completely unprepared for dealing with a vampire. Make sense? Thus, the vampires have a colossal advantage. Huge advantage. They are just 20 levels higher than the humans, even ignoring their special abilities and whatever their generation is and whatever their current blood package is. And you got the gummies, Doesn't matter, because the humans are in no way prepared to deal with something that they don't even know what it is. Now imagine the humans do know what they are. Again, J.K. Rowling hit this point just as well. Imagine if the Muggles knew what wizards were, knew what vampires were, knew what mages were, knew how they worked. How long do you think it would take for them to start developing counters to those kind of creatures? A year? 6 months? 5? A day? If you really think about it, the moment humans have encountered any kind of obstacle, that sort of adaptation pretty much immediately happens, even if the humans don't deliberately do it. It's part of our nature. There are several fictional settings that have played with this concept, actually. The idea of, at first we were being completely overwhelmed by the insert threat here, but then, like the second movie or the second game or the second book, now that they know what they're facing, they start adapting to it, and the writers start thinking, okay, how would humans adapt to this threat in real life? And they start writing that kind of stuff in, right? Make sense? This is the great power of the Masquerade itself, and why the Masquerade exists. Because the humans would win. If humanity as a whole was well aware of vampires and how they function, they'd win. But it's not just about survival. It's about maintenance. And this is, I know I'm kind of rambling about the setting a little bit, but trust me, this is directly related to this game, Bloodlines, in particular. It's all about maintaining that status quo of vampires at the top of the food chain. Now, some people would argue that vampires are not at the top of the food chain. Lord knows any given werewolf will probably rip a vampire to shreds. But you get what I mean by that, right? The vampires are the upper aristocratic nobility, the upper crust of society, basically, of culture. These are the rich, the wealthy, and the ones who are in control of society, right? They want to maintain that, and they can't if they lose their greatest advantage. And that's the real driving reason for the Masquerade to be maintained. They need to maintain that edge because they need it, and because they want to retain their foot on the neck of humanity. Make sense? So, the second thing I want to talk about, I know this is kind of a weird divergence, but trust me, these two major points are going to tie in here, is politics. Politikos, actually, is the word that's derived from most recently, which is a Greek word, which means from or derived from citizenry, or people, if you will. I mention that because most of the time nowadays in modern society, when people say the word politics, they think of stuffy, fat idiots who are sitting in an uncomfortable room making laws about things they don't understand. And while that's valid, usually when I refer to the term politics, especially with regards to fiction, I mean more the interactions between people, a little more literal usage of the word. You know, the politics of Final Fantasy XII or Final Fantasy Tactics, for example, were fascinating and interesting and engaging, whereas if you were to actually go to the United States Congress right now and watch them sit in an uncomfortable room and make rules about things they don't understand, that's not really engaging, is it? Vampire the Masquerade, the setting, not just Bloodlines, lives and breathes politics. That's basically what it's all about, especially because you're playing with other players most of the time. Obviously not true in a video game, but bear with me. Like I said, this is going to tie into the video game, I swear. You are all about trying to interact with person, and in that true political sense of the word, trading favors, trying to get your interests that you own and the businesses you own, or the things that you have influence over, to move forward in a way that benefits you, either gets you more money or more territory, or hurts your rivals or helps your allies. It's all that kind of constant internecine, non-stop polite warfare. While there is some actual violence involved, the vast majority of Vampire the Masquerade, both from my experience and from the books and whatnot, is a little less actually killing people and a little more the kind of political conflict that you think and that you'd see. You know, someone like Vayne Solidor, for example, would absolutely wreck face in Vampire the Masquerade because he's really good at that particular type of political machinations. This... first of all, this is absolutely fascinating to me. It's the kind of thing I really enjoy, actually. It's one of the reasons I wanted to get into the LARP concept in general. Until a frickin' guy bit someone else. Literally, physically bit someone else. He was a bit of a... So, the reason I tie both of these points into the game, the Masquerade itself and the politics, is that is what this game is. I gave that huge speech describing Vampire the Masquerade as a setting, as a concept, as the world of darkness, so that you would understand what this video game is. Like I said, I wanted to zoom the camera out. This game is what it would be like, with one exception, to be a newborn Neos, I can't remember what they call them all of a sudden. There's a term for it. A newly made, a newly embraced vampire within the World of Darkness setting, in LA in specific. And it's pretty much on the nose. Yeah, there's a lot of work about the Masquerade itself and the interactions with humans, and there's a lot of work with regards to the politics involved, a huge amount, as is appropriate for a game made by the people who made Arcanum, for the people who made Fallout, for the people who would make Alpha Protocol. This game has lots and lots and lots of character interactions and dynamics. It's one of the reasons I didn't want to just do the list format. It would feel like I'm just, okay, then there's this character, and then there's this character. It's all over the place. It's wonderful. I eat it up. Again, if you haven't played this game, go play it right now. I'm not even spoiling anything for you, really. I have refrained from spoilers thus far. There are going to be some spoilers in a minute, though, don't worry. And I eat that up, and it really is the whole point of the game thematically. What would it be like to be a newborn, embraced vampire within the world of darkness? Here you go. And like I said, there's a backdrop plot with regard to the sarcophagus, but otherwise it's just all about you, how you interact with the world around you. And it's great. I love it. Now, I mentioned there's one exception. Naturally, the overwhelming majority of video game design lends itself towards increasing power levels, right? Whether you get access to more power-ups, or more hearts, if you're playing a Zelda game, more levels, if you're playing an RPG, more equipment, if you're playing a Metroidvania type game. your overall power level goes up over the course of the game. That is the norm. That is so much the norm that you could list the exceptions on like a single sheet of paper as far as video game design. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. What I am saying is for that to happen in the Vampire Masquerade, the setting, something has to come in and change that, because due to the nature of how vampires work within the world of darkness, you're kind of bound within your generation. I actually forget what generation we start out in this game. It's 13th to 15th, one of the range in there. Pretty young, in other words. For those of you not aware, the smaller the number of your generation, the greater your power potential is. Now, I make that word very clear, because that's how that works. It's not like a 10th generation will always be stronger than an 11th generation. A 10th generation will always have the potential to be stronger than an 11th generation. Make sense? But as a brand new vampire, again, 13th to 15th, I'm sure you can all gonna tell me what the number is when I get the comments for this video. Generation vampire, you should be pretty much a total weakling. And thus that power increase, there's 3 ways to do that from a game design. Now, they went with the third, which I'll discuss last. You could either have a situation where you do increase in power, but it's basically it's like a fish getting, it's a little fish in a big pond thing. You're getting stronger in your little corner, but you're still an absolute joke compared to the actual scale of things, right? So you're getting stronger, but you're still a baby fish. That's difficult to pull off in a game in general. It requires very, very tight and very careful writing. I actually had an idea for like a game done in the style of this, where you always stay a small fish. That would be a rather depressing game, though. And I'm still building to this overall point, but as you'll see, the life of a newly made vampire in the Camilla is not exactly a good one. Or in hell, in the world of darkness in general. So, the second way you could do that is to have them never go up in power at all, basically. It's kind of similar to the first option, but have you, cap out very early on, and have you basically have a down-to-earth kind of perspective. Instead of playing Cisco, you're playing... God, I can't think of a good example of that, because all the main characters would qualify as someone who would be main protagonist level. You're playing extra number 3. You still get to see all the events of Deep Space Nine happening, but you're over there on ops, whereas everyone else is actually doing the main events, that kind of a thing, which is also very tricky to pull off as a writer. The third option is what they actually did in this game. They cheated. Now, there are other ways to cheat. For those of you not aware, there is a concept in World of Darkness called Bloodlines. I've heard it pronounced several different ways. It's really horrible. Basically, you consume the soul, along with a fairly large amount of blood, of someone who is a higher, more powerful generation than you, and then your generation goes up a bit. You get more potential because you're now closer to the curse of Cain. Make sense? So, that's one way to do it. It's considered really horrible, and yet also really desirable by a lot of people. In fact, the main plot of LaCroix in this game is quite literally to diabolarize what he believes to be a third-generation antediluvian in the sarcophagus. This is officially your last spoiler warning, because that's not what's in the sarcophagus. Moving on. I love that scene. So that's one way they could have made it cheat, like they could have had the player character do that. But forcing the player character to do something that's considered one of the most horrible things you could do in lore, that's a weird way to do it. So they cheated a different way. Basically, your generation keeps going up, and they never say outright why. And I'd like to talk about why I think that happened. So I'm going to talk about 3 characters really quick. This is the only character stuff I'm going to do in this particular rumination. I want to talk about LaCroix. I just mentioned him. He's the bad guy, along with the Asian woman, whose name I don't know how to pronounce off the top of my head, so forgive me. LaCroix is an interesting example, because I feel like I just talked about a character like him over in Alien Isolation. I've already forgotten his name, because obviously it's been a little bit since I played Alien Isolation. The executive you never really see, the one who wasn't from Weyland-Yutani, the one who was from the other company, who thought he was this big manipulative corporate shark, and actually he was just a pathetic nobody. That's LaCroix. Well, he certainly does have some significant power. He is a prince, after all, which is, I know you probably don't know the setting, but that's not exactly an insignificant thing. It's made very clear that the only reason he holds on to power is because of the sheriff he's got, the reins of, for whatever reason. If it wasn't for that, he'd probably be ousted in a minute. And a lot of people hate him. And he actively tries to kill off the player character many, many times. And several characters, it is at least implied, will actively go out of the way to help you out because it pisses him off. So he is a variant of a Type 3, a variant of a Type 3 villain. In other words, the smug snake who manipulates everything and smiles to your face and then stabs you in the back. Except he is the variant because he's terrible at it. He is not smart. He preaches on and on about the goods of leadership. Every idea I make is superior. Blah, 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 blah. Everyone else thinks that their ideas are superior to mine, but they're wrong. Blah, 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 blah. But he's actually a moron who constantly screws up and is so blinded by his own naked greed for power. He has this whole survivalist mentality. That's an important point for later, by the way. This whole survivalist mentality that just, oh yes, whatever I do is justified and acceptable, blah, 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 blah. It has been debated by many people who've played this game, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, if he's actually a villain, though. He's definitely an opponent to the PC. He is actively trying to kill you, literally from the moment he actually interacts with you. But whether he's a villain, whether he is evil or not, is much more debated. I'm not going to lay my judgment on that one. I'm curious of what you guys think. I will say that I will absolutely judge that he's pathetic, but that's another point. The next character I want to talk about is Smiling Jack. First of all, Joe DiMaggio, great actor. He's fun. He's a great example of three things in this setting, and in the game in particular. First of all, he's a great example of what the generation things really mean. Smiling Jack is actually a 10th generation, which means he's just a little bit weaker than average, at least as far as it's concerned. But as I mentioned earlier, generation means your potential, not your actuality. A truly skilled, truly intelligent, truly versed 10th generation is going to be a lot better in a position than a 9th or an 8th or a 7th who is sitting on their laurels and not really trying. And that is Smiling Jack in spades. He is quite literally a legend. And of course, he's not just in the game, he's from the overall great works. So he's an example of that. The second thing he's an example is he's a great way to shine a light onto the classism. There is so much elitism and classism within this setting. It is absolutely everywhere. The Nosferatu hate the Toreadors, and the Anarchs hate the Camilla in general, and just it's everywhere. I'm not even going to list all the examples. There's dozens upon dozens of examples of how everyone looks down upon everyone else. But one of the more common ones is the generational thing. A 9th will almost always act superior to a 10th, because in their mind they are superior, whether they actually are or not. The final thing Smiling Jack shines a light onto is the nature of this setting with regards to villains, because arguably he's the main bad guy of this game. This is really your last warning on spoilers. He's the one who got the sarcophagus here and started circulating rumors about it, along with someone else, in order to stir the pot, basically. His motivations can be debated. Personally, I actually think he was just seeing what he could do with it before the end of the world. Again, remember, this is right before Final Nights. But he basically plays everyone. He plays absolutely every character, including the main character in some ways, because he understands how this society works. I want to kind of save that point. So him playing everyone and the way this society works, just save that in the back of your mind for just a second, okay? Because I want to talk about someone else really quick before we move on to my final point, and that's the cab driver. Let me go ahead and just say that in my personal opinion, there is no doubt in my mind that that is Kane. That the cab driver is Kane, the original vampire. His purpose, his motive, to me it seems like it's the obvious one. It's the final days. He is running around seeing what has become a vampire society and how it's going to fall. He is there to watch the end. And I'm not going to list evidence or whatever. I'm not going to go into that. I'm curious, of course, of your debates on this and whether you think he is Kane or he isn't, and if he is Kane, what his motivation is in being here, and blah, blah, blah. But I mentioned Kane because, remember how I mentioned the cheating thing? It is implied, but never stated outright, that the reason the PC's generation keeps getting bumped up is because Kane is fiddling, basically upping his generation as he progresses through the game, to the point where it's not just you're a skilled 13th or whatever, you're a skilled ninth or you're a skilled 5th. By the end of the game, you get to the point where you can take on an elder with relative ease, actually. Well, I shouldn't say relative ease, but you're capable of doing it, which is something that basically shouldn't happen. That's my big take on exactly how they cheat with the player character. A lore reason, which would make a degree of sense, especially since, again, at this point in time, it's not like it matters much. The final nights are coming, Now, remember that point I had over to the side here? By the way, I chose the Anarch ending for this curious. Final point I had on the side here. Vampire society has become so degenerate by this point in history, so decadent, so screwed up, so jacked up, that all it takes to completely cause an entire city to self-destruct is a rumor and a sarcophagus. Think about that for a moment. Jack knew exactly what he was doing with that, and arguably the cab driver did, whether he's keen or not. The idea that it would be so tempting and so polarizing to everyone to try and do that. I've actually used a concept like this myself in stories as well, and I'm sure you can think of other concepts in fiction as well, where a lie has been offered of some temptation of great power or great wealth or great prestige, something that would be very desirous to many people is offered. And it is a lie. There is no great power, no great wealth, no great prestige, but it's offered up there specifically so that the packs of wolves will all tear each other to shreds trying to get to this, because that's exactly what Smiling Jack does with the LA area. He says, here. And so many people are just salivating at the idea of diablerizing what might be an antediluvian. It even makes sense that it would be one of them. For those who don't know, antediluvian is a third generation, which is really strong. But because they are so old, they basically spend all their time in torpor, which is exactly what it sounds like, the inability to function. So it would be very easy, technically, for them to take all that power for themselves. And so they all manipulate and hurt and kill and ruin everyone else just for a chance to get at a box that has an empty box with some C4 in it and a note that says, ah! And that is so appropriate, because that is how broken Vampire Society has become just before the final nights. And I think this is the overall point I've been building to this entire time, that this is the major theme of the game, that Vampire Society is just broken. Not just the world in general, not the world in general, but the Vampire Society in specific. This is an entire society that has been built around the Masquerade, which, in addition to alienating them from the rest of the culture of the world, has also served to reinforce their self-perceived notions of elitist superiority. It makes all the vampires, even some of the lesser ones, think of themselves as simply better, and it has encouraged a degradation of cultural understanding and evolution. The vampires, overall, have become a stank, dank, fetid pit of water. No longer being stirred, it's no longer being filtered, it's just this giant bowl of muck. And that's the overall theme of the game as a whole. And that's why I mentioned my point earlier about how this is a day in the life for the PC and how much it sucks to be a newborn vampire, because you're basically just entering the society that is horrible. And that sucks in almost every facet of it. Right before it's about to end, too. Right before Etch-a-Sketch into the world. And I like that. And it's one of the reasons why I would find the concept of a story in which you never progress in power fascinating. Because that way, not only are you entering a world which sucks, but you have no power in that world, and the world's about to end. So you're basically screwed from day one. That might be a little bit too depressing, though. But I really, really like that approach to things. And it is indicative of that kind of thing. Remember, all these people used to be human. You can argue the specifics of whether they qualify as human or not anymore. That's up to you. I'm not going to go into that. I know there's a whole thing about the beast and you blah, 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 and the center of the labyrinth. I'm not going to go into that, okay? It is my opinion that these people, in the ways that count, are still human. In other words, a human society, which had the same closed-off masquerade concept, would have the exact same degradation of culture to the point that we have here. And I find that fascinating and horrifying at the same time. I could relate that to other fictional works. Babylon 5, the Mars people, is a great example of that. But I'm going to leave you with that thought. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on Bloodlines and Vampire the Masquerade. And I will be seeing you guys next time.